In this video, we're going to build a very simple website using Flask just to introduce how Flask works. So Flask is a tool you need to install with pip in the usual way, how you install Python libraries. So it'd be pip install Flask, and the Flask website has extensive documentation, including minimal application or how to install. So read through that as necessary. So it'd be something like this. So let's get started. I'm going to call it my app.py. Flask is an import because it's a Python library. And we're actually going to use the class. So Python does have classes, like Java and C++ have classes. We're going to use the class called Flask with a capital F, but that's in the package called Flask with a lowercase f. So we're going to import from lowercase Flask, the module, import the class capital Flask. From Flask, import Flask. So this is how you can import specific things from a Python module or Python library. Then we're going to make a global variable called app, just because it's as good a name as any. And we call the constructor of that class. You can give your app a name if you want. Then I need to, so it's a web app, meaning it's going to respond as a website. So it's going to need functions that display the page or return the page content for different addresses, like the one that's just a slash, the one that's slash, whatever after the slash, depending on what my app is going to do. I'll just do a few example things here, but in your assignment, you're going to have probably slash like, and then either the ID of a note, like a number, or a title for the note that may go after the slash, and so on. So you got to respond to those different addresses, those URLs. And this is how you do that with Flask. You say app.route. So it should be the variable that you chose before, app.route. This is called a Python decorator. It's a way of providing information to a class object. So we're going to say this, the function that follows is responding to just the slash, which is the home page. No colon here, but then you define an actual function. And we're not going to have any arguments in this case, but you could have arguments if you have stuff after the slash. And you do whatever you do, but you ultimately got to return whatever's supposed to be displayed on that front page. So, not print, sorry. Print will show on the screen here, not on the web page. So that will be my web page content, just that phrase. Now, all this won't actually start Flask. It just defines everything. So I need to actually execute it all. And there's two ways to do this. I'll show you one way, but probably the Flask documentation has the other way. We're going to use the Python feature that is known as name. It's a special variable. So name with the underscores will equal the word main if you're running it from the command line like we're going to do. So we're going to check that that's true. And if that's true, then we're going to execute Flask by saying our variable app, we're going to run you. And of course, being a web server, acting as a website, it's going to need an IP address. So we'll say just listen from connections from anywhere, and a port. So we'll say listen to port 5000. Then when you run it, it should say it's starting up. And there's settings you would turn off to make it not give these warnings, but it doesn't matter. So now I can go to this address. Now technically I'm running this through SSH, so I'm going to go to a slightly different address, which is on my network. But this is the website that we just made. All right, so it is responding only to the slash page. It's not going to respond to anything else because I don't have those routes defined. So it's not found. Let's go further and actually put some HTML content, so make a page look kind of normal, kind of nice. And to do that, let's use a theme called Bootstrap. So you go to getbootstrap.com, and you don't really need to download it. You can actually just use their version online by grabbing this. And we got to go make a web page now. So this is Python code. I'm going to get out of the Python code and make a HTML file. By default, Flask is going to expect to find these HTML files in a folder called templates. So actually, let me check on that, make sure it's plural. Yeah, so templates. So we're going to make directory templates. And then we'll just call it theme.html. Actually, you might have different pages, so let's call it home.html. And here I'm just going to do my typical HTML setup. Actually, Bootstrap has an example of, where was it? Starter template here. So you can just grab all this. And it says hello again, so that's good for us. We'll use the same thing. So I've just pasted everything in here. Quick rundown of what this is in HTML. So some of these things are just kind of standard. They don't display anything, but it's just saying I'm HTML, my language is in English. Head is all the information about the web page, like it's the characters are UTF, universal characters. You could put Japanese or Chinese or something in here for the different kind of characters that you might have. Viewport is just make the whole thing stretch out. Bootstrap CSS, this is the style. Titles, this is what you see at the top of on the tab here. That's title. And then body, so close off head. The slash means close off this category, or we call it a tag. Start body tag. H1 is the largest header. So this is probably like an H2 or H3. Larger would be H1. It'll say hello world. And then there is JavaScript support in Bootstrap, which is where things can like collapse or slide or whatever. So this is bringing in that code. And then it closes off body and closes off HTML. So this is a file called home in the folder called templates. So let's go back out of the folder called templates and go back to our app and say to Flask, load that file. That is the page I want to show people. So don't show hello, show render template, which means go use the template. So let me make sure I got this code right. So it's known as render template. And then you give the file name. It's going to go look in the templates folder for you. Come over here. This is still running, so I'm going to hit Control C and then run it again. Reload my page. Oh, I have an error. Render. Oh, I forgot to import the name render template. So I can't execute the function called render template yet. So from, actually I already got from Flask, I'll say import render template. I could have referred to it, I guess, as flask.render template, but let's just fix it that way. So there's my more stylish H1 in the Bootstrap format. So Bootstrap is very widely used to make websites that look normal today. If you don't use anything for CSS, your website looks like it's from the 90s. And you don't want that. So this is a good way to make your website look normal, like what people expect. And you'll see things like, the forms, how it outlines in blue, and it's this wide. And let's do other things like checkboxes, highlights like that. And clicking here will check it. And you've also got cool things like alerts and things that can collapse, and what are called modals. They pop up and give you like a OK or cancel kind of button. You can put whatever content you want in there. So these kind of displays can be done with Bootstrap. Cards, how you kind of have this outline, and you can have a whole bunch of them like this. There are pop-overs like this. And what else is interesting? Accordions do things like this. So if you go to Bootstrap and go through documentation, you'll see all their examples of how this works. And the one thing that you want to do first, probably with Bootstrap, is understand the grid. And the grid just means that you're going to break up the page into rows and columns. So each row can have up to, I think, 12 columns. And where's the example? So column small will kind of decide how many. But if you want specifically, you can say 2 columns, or specifically 6 columns, or whatever. And the MD and LG and all that is all talking about your screen size. So it'll switch the number of columns if you have your smaller screen, like on a phone. So Bootstrap is really nice for developing websites that work both on desktops and phones, because it'll reorganize things with this grid system when your screen is super small. And people will be able to use your site properly. So look around here, see how they do things. If you are starting to make a form, make sure you go to the form section and see how to represent all the different elements, because you want them to look all in the same style. The other thing that you might want to know about is there are themes for different colors. So these are kind of ones you'd pay for, but you can also just develop your own theme. And this one you could just download straight, but so this lets you try out what it looks like, but there's another site that lets you modify it. It's a Bootstrap main. Well, in any case, there's a whole industry for making Bootstrap themes. I've seen a site, I can find it later, where you can adjust the colors for all the different elements on the page. But as you see, there's just themes everywhere for fonts and colors and layouts and things. So back to this. All I did was use their example starting template for Bootstrap. The other thing that you want to know about is how to do links. So let me edit the result here, this home page, and make a link in it to another page. P for paragraph. I'm curious, if I just change the template file, come back here, it won't refresh it. So I have to close Flask and restart Flask. All right, so there's my text, but I want a link. So I'm going to say A stands for anchor. It's like a place in the text where you can click it. Href stands for hypertext reference. It's all kind of old, early 90s terminology, but this is where you would say what's the location as an address of the page you'll go to if you click this. And so we'll say page 2. And then you got to close off the anchor to say when, this part will be the part you click. All right, so if you refresh, now it's blue, as typical links are. And you see at the bottom, it's page 2 is where I'm going to go if I click it, but there's no page 2. So I can come back over here and make a page 2. I don't have to call it page 2, whatever. And not print. You'd have whatever you have there. I'm not going to go through and make a whole application, but so here are 2 two different pages. So they can link to each other or whatever you got to do. Next, we will look at how to put extra data in your address here. So let's not call it page 2. Let's say that when you click this, it's going to something that has like an ID in the address. So we'll call it item, and then we'll give it ID, item ID. Okay, so what I've done in this paragraph, I've said look at item 1, the link goes to /item/1, and then BR is break, go to next line, or look at item 2, item/2. So this thing will handle any /item/. So any number here will fit in this route. And I can get the thing that's following the second slash by referring to it as item ID. So as you'll see here, I'll just put the message, whatever the item ID is, and the way I get that is I got to put item ID as the argument. So Flask will identify that the address contains a number or a thing after this /item/, and it will feed that into my function. And then I'll use it in the return. Right, so let's go back to the home page. Look at item 1. So you see it grabbed the 1 and stuck it right there. And item 2. So I have one route that handles pretty much any page that starts with item. So what you normally do, obviously, is use this value that the user has given you and go look in some dictionary or database or something and retrieve that data. And then if you want to put the result back in your template and not just something simple like this, then your template needs to have spots where you can feed in a value. So let's say whatever, I'll call it item. Okay, so what I've done so far, in my template, I've said, I'm going to use the message data about item : that'll just display as normal. But then I'm going to put in data coming from my Python file. So my Python file is going to feed data to the template. That's what the double squiggle braces are for. And up here, I'll say, render template home as usual, but then the thing called item in the template will be this variable, which will be from right here. So you make a variable, or you get a variable from data, dictionary, whatever database, and you feed it into your template by putting arguments after, oh, misspelled render, after the name of the template. And then whatever you call it here is what you should call it here when you actually put it in the template HTML file. All right, so the /item/2 page loads the normal template from the home page, except it also has this line, and this content came from my Python file. So let's do something a little more realistic. As a last example, we'll say state again. and then we'll look up so it'll look in the states dictionary for whatever that key is, and that will be the item. So down here, I want to make sure I use CA and FL, since those are proper keys. I'll just call it item, doesn't matter. All right, so the only point is I'm looking up in a dictionary from elsewhere in the code, a global actually, and getting the data for the item. Oh, I have an error. Oh, that's because I didn't handle the case where there's nothing in the dictionary, so there's no 2, but there is an FL. So FL matches Florida. And if you go back to the home page, there's just nothing there because this didn't pass in item equal anything. All right, so the example is a bit convoluted, clearly, but it's the elements that you need to know. And on the second video, we'll talk about a little more realistic example where we're actually saving some data to a dictionary in the Python code, and we'll use a form to get data from the user.